Hello and welcome to the first in my SHARDATHON series of videos. If you haven't yet heard of SHARDATHON, it is a Cosmere inspired readathon that I have created that will be running throughout the month of October. And if you would like to hear more about that, I will link the announcement video up here for you, and I will put the playlist down in the description bar. So in this video I am going to be recommending some books to you if you want to follow the path of Vin. And the reason I am starting with Vin is because she is the character I have selected to read for throughout the month of October. So I will be doing my own TBR after my 3 suggestion videos, and I didn't want to repeat Vin's prompts in a couple of weeks in a row or too close together, so I decided to start with Vin. So these are just some of my own recommendations if you would like to read for Vin during SHARDATHON. So Vin's first prompt for Iron, which is to pull metal, is to read a new book. And these aren't so much recommendations as they are suggestions, because I haven't actually read any of these myself yet, but they are just some books that are new that have come out that I think would be really great reads for this readathon. So the first is a very new book. It's not even out as I'm filming this, but it will be out in the month of October, which is of course when SHARDATHON takes place, and that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by Victoria Schwab, or V.E. Schwab. And this follows a character named Addie who has made a deal with the devil to live forever. But the downside to this deal is that no one will ever remember who she is once they are out of her sight, or once she is out of their sight. And then one day she meets somebody who remembers who she is. And right at the beginning of the Mistborn series, Vin is a very invisible person, and she likes it that way, but she starts to discover that maybe she doesn't need to be quite so invisible after all, which is why I think this would make a really nice read for the first prompt for Vin. My next suggestion is Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron, which is a story that takes place 200 years after the events of Cinderella has happened, and now society is set up that once a year there is a ball, and all of the eligible males and females attend this ball, and the point is for them to pair up. But our main character, Sophia, doesn't like that system, and neither does the descendant of Cinderella herself, so they team up to take this system down. And if you know anything about the Mistborn series, that is exactly what our gang of main characters are trying to do, Vin included. And the final book isn't necessarily connected to Mistborn in any way. I just want to suggest it because I love this author and I love all her books, and I don't think she ever gets enough hype. So I'm going to suggest The Reckless Afterlife of Harriet Stoker by Lauren James, which is a paranormal YA ghost story, and I cannot wait to read this one. This will not be on my TBR because there is no way I'm going to make it to October before reading this, but just check out this book by Lauren James and check out all of her books. She's fabulous. I should probably tell you what it's about. So this follows a character named Harriet Stoker who unfortunately dies and comes back as a ghost, and she discovers that she's not on her own. There are other ghosts there as well, and they're very excited to have a new friend, but then things start to go wrong and they have to save the afterlife. The next prompt for Vin is Steel Push Metal, a book that you have been pushing back on your TBR for a while, and this will of course be incredibly individual, so I can't really make recommendations for you for this one either, so I thought I'd just show you a few books that I have on my TBR and have had on my TBR for a while to maybe spark some inspiration for you. So first of all I have Oh My Gods by Alexandra Shepherd, which is an urban fantasy in which our main character is actually the daughter of the Greek gods. So she has to deal with being a teenager in school whilst also being half god. nothing could go wrong, right? Then we have An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, which is a fantasy story that I don't really know much about, and I don't really want to. The first line of the synopsis is: an orphan fighting for her family, a soldier searching for his freedom, a story burning to be told. That's all I want to know. And then finally we have The Swan Book by Alexis Wright, which is an Own Voices Indigenous Australian story about a dystopian future where Indigenous Australians are being oppressed, which I don't necessarily know how dystopian that is compared to reality, but I guess I'll find out. Next up we have Tin, Heighten the Senses, a book that will make you angry. The first book I have to recommend for this one is Slay by Brittany Morris, which is contemporary with some science fiction elements because the protagonist of this story, Kira, has created a video game for exclusively black players so that they will have somewhere safe on the internet to go and play a game without fear of harassment. But then something goes wrong associated with the game and Kira is really concerned that she will come under fire because people are starting to call this video game racist and exclusionary. And some of the ways in which the black characters in this story are treated is so realistic and incredibly frustrating, and I'm getting angry just thinking about it, so I think that this book definitely ticks that box. The same can be said for The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, which follows Star, who unfortunately witnesses the murder of one of her best friends at the hands of a police officer, despite the fact that he was unarmed and doing absolutely nothing wrong. And if that doesn't make you angry, I don't know what will. And then finally we have The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which is a fantasy story set in a world that is plagued by fifth seasons, which are what this society calls it when there is a devastating environmental disaster which results in humanity basically having to start all over again. And in this world there are people who have access to magic that allows them to control the earth, but rather than these individuals being lauded and praised for their ability to save humanity from these natural disasters, instead they are oppressed and they are treated incredibly poorly. This is a very dark story. There are trigger warnings for just about everything you can imagine, so if you're considering this one, please look up a detailed list of the trigger warnings for this book, because there are so many and you need to be ready for that if you decide to go into this one. But there is so much injustice in here that I definitely think it would make you angry. Next up is Pewter, Increase Physical Powers, Read a Book in One Sitting. So for this one I have chosen to recommend you some short stories. The first is another one by Lauren James. This time it's The Starlight Watchmaker, which as you can see is very short. This copy is 119 pages and this is printed and published by Barrington Stoke, who print books in such a way that they are incredibly accessible to people with dyslexia. So they use a specific colour of paper, specific font with specific spacing and sizing that makes it easier for dyslexic readers, which I think is really lovely. And so this book is a very quick read, and it is a story fundamentally about friendship. It's absolutely adorable. I'm not going to say any more than that about it, other than the fact that it's science fiction and there are no human characters in it. Next up, I'm going to recommend Nick and Charlie by Alice Oseman. I'll caveat this one by saying if you haven't read Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, read that instead. You shouldn't read this before reading Heartstopper, and you can read Heartstopper online for free, so there's no excuse to not read it. But this one is a prose novella about Nick and Charlie. There are illustrations throughout this particular copy, but you can get this as an ebook as well, and it's just adorable and short and cute and sweet, and it will tear your hair out and smush it into the ground and then push it back into your chest and make it all whole again. That's what Alice Oseman does with Nick and Charlie. And then finally we have City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. This is another paranormal ghost story, this time following Cassidy Blake, who can see and speak to ghosts, and it's her job to help them move on to wherever it is they go next. It's a little bit longer than the other two, but this one is middle grade, so very nice, quick and easy to read, and I found it a really fun and enjoyable story. Next up we have Zinc, which inflames emotions. Read a book with mental health themes. The first book I'm going to recommend for this is one of my favourites of the year so far, and that is The Sound of Stars by Alicia Dow. This is a science fiction light story that follows two main perspectives. One is Morris, and he is a lab-grown alien who, for some reason, even though he shouldn't, loves music. And the other is Ellie, who is human living on an Earth that has been colonized, essentially, by aliens, and that colonization has led to the murder of millions and millions of humans, and she is one of the few that is left, and she is running an illegal library, and her and Morris end up coming together in very unexpected circumstances. The mental health representation in this one is depression and anxiety. I felt like it was really well done, and this story is just so epic and wonderful, and the relationships between the characters and within themselves as well is just, I can't recommend this book enough. It's so great, and I really can't wait to reread it at some point, hopefully soon. And then the next one deals with grief, which is We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. And this one follows Marin as she deals with her grief and her depression and her relationship with her best friend and former girlfriend. And I don't want to say too much about what this story is about, because this story is about finding out what it's about, if that makes sense, but it's quite short and it's incredibly powerful and very emotional, and I loved reading it as much as you can love reading something that's just so incredibly sad. So I highly recommend this one, but again, check the trigger warnings. Brass is to soothe emotions. Read a book and have a snack. So for this one, I'm going to recommend some snacks to you, because why not? So a cup of tea, that's my top recommendation. Some biscuits. If you have the patience and the time, bake yourself some cookies, especially the ones that are gooey in the middle. Yum. And if you want something savoury, then I recommend nachos with lots and lots and lots of cheese and salsa. I personally wouldn't have jalapenos because I can't eat stuff that's spicy, but if that's your thing, you could do that too. I don't know, I just wrote down what I felt like in the moment, and those were the things that called to me. So if you're doing this one and you have recommendations of snacks, then leave them down below, and I will try not to eat them all. The next prompt is Copper Hide Powers, and this is to read a book from Tensoon's list. So you will have to tune in to my Tensoon recommendations to see what I suggest for those. That one will be coming the week after next. And then finally, Bronze Hear Powers, listen to an audiobook. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to recommend you some of my absolute favourite audiobooks. So the first one I have picked Strange the Dreamer by Lani Taylor, but honestly this one is narrated by Steve West, and I feel like the production of this audiobook in particular was really great, but honestly any audiobook narrated by Steve West is absolutely fantastic. If you ask me, he does an amazing job of narrating books. He's my favourite narrator, and I highly recommend anything by him, and I think this is my favourite of the ones that he's narrated, but again, you can't go wrong with any of his narration. Next up, we have The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This is a book that I read in the month of August. Absolutely loved. It's my favourite book so far this year. The story is so whimsical. I have a full book review coming for it next week, so I won't say too much for now, but what I will say is the narration of the audiobook really added to the reading experience of this one for me. It brought the characters alive. The voices that the narrator gave to all of the characters was so distinctive for starters and just so perfect, and this is a story that is very whimsical, and that addition of whimsy through the audio narration was just perfect, spot on, highly recommend. Next up, if you like a full cast audio experience, I would recommend the Illuminae Files by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. Fun fact, Steve West also appears in the second book in the Illuminae Files for the audio narration, so we've got him twice here, and the narration for this is just fantastic. It is a multimedia story anyway, and there are sound effects that go along with the narration, so the audiobooks for these are just so well put together, and I still think that you should follow along in the physical book if you can, because you get that full experience of the multimedia format, but the audiobooks are stellar. Then we have The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, and I originally read this physically and then I reread it using the audio, and I was so impressed with the level of additional emotion that the audio narration of this story brought. It is just one single narrator, but she just does such a fantastic job of differentiating between the characters without doing wild and wacky accents or voices for all of the characters. That does happen in The House in the Cerulean Sea, and it really works in here, but it would just have made this a lot less serious than it needed to be, and so the way that the narrator added to the story with the narration was just perfect, and it made the story even more emotional than it already was. And then finally, I'm recommending Skyward by Brandon Sanderson, because I couldn't really do a recommendations video for Shardathon, which is a readathon inspired by the Cosmere, which was written by Brandon Sanderson, and not include a Sanderson book. So here it is, and that's because the audiobook for this book and its sequel, Starsight, are just great. Once again, the narrator doesn't do any fancy voices or special effects or anything like that, but she just brings the story so much more to life, and it was such a fun and enjoyable read. Again, I read this one physically the first time through and then listened to the audiobook on reread, and it was so good that even though I'd planned to physically read Starsight, which is the sequel, I ended up reading and listening to it because the narrator just did such a fantastic job with this story. So highly recommend that book in general, but especially the audiobook. And that's it. Those are all of my recommendations if you are following the path of Vin during the Shardathon. If you are and you have your TBR already planned out, then do let me know what books you've picked for it, or link me to any of your videos or Instagram posts or anything like that. I really want to hear what you have planned. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks! Bye!